Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about the greatest mistake, what I consider the greatest mistake done on the Titanic. Now, this is a story that's filled with great mistakes, if you think about it. As Walter Lord used to say, that the Titanic disaster was a perfect Greek tragedy, because there were so many things happening, so many problems taking place, so many problems being caused by the actions of those on the ship. Well, nonetheless, when the accident happened, which is an odd situation because they knew when the ice was going to be coming, they had a general idea, they didn't have extra lookouts, the captain wasn't up, you had the fourth officer at the wheel at the time, you had the lookouts on the crow's nest, that's it. And they were doing 21 knots, perhaps a touch more. And, of course, the berg was sighted. They tried to turn. And what ended up happening, which is so badly reported so many times, they make it seem like the Titanic actually crashes into the iceberg. Of course, it doesn't. Believe me, a 46,000-ton ship running into a massive iceberg and hitting it, you would know it. Okay, people would have gone flying. But the thing is, what they did, they were able to turn to avoid the major point of the iceberg, but ran over the submerged part. The Titanic actually rose up in the water as it rolled over the submerged iceberg. And that's where your damage happens. It tears the bottom of the ship apart and causes the problems that will lead to its complete collapse and breakup as it sinks further. But that's one of the problems. But that wasn't the worst problem, because that was done by the accident, which we realize. And my statement was the worst action done after the accident. Now, a couple of other contenders, just to mention. Second Officer Lightoller. Now, he was told, women and children first. And like a bureaucrat, he listened very carefully and put women and children on. And if there were no women and children left, he lowered the boats. He wouldn't allow men on. This is insane. On the starboard side, just so you know, Murdock was loading the boats, and it was women and children first. And then when they ran out of women and children that were waiting there, they added men. Logical. Makes sense. Lightoller caused the death of a lot of people by not filling up the boats properly. And he came up with lame excuses, like he didn't know if the boats could hold 65 individuals, which they were tested for. He was involved right there when they were doing the test. So that's just bogus. There's a lot of issues with Lightoller. He lies a lot. And he thought himself a company man, so he lied, and the company just kind of avoided him. The thing is that the worst thing done was done by the captain. The Titanic, when it did have its accident, as soon as it did, the engines were stopped. And the Titanic slowly glided to a stop, which took a while. And finally it had stopped. And of course, Ismay comes up. Thomas Andrews comes up. Fourth Officer Boxhall comes up, and he's sent to go check out the ship. And he said he didn't see much damage, which, for everyone involved, that's the last little bit of good news that they'll ever hear. Shortly afterwards, the carpenter announces that there's damage. And then, of course, Thomas Andrews takes a tour through the ship. Now, while this is going on, Ismay, who was the chairman of the company, talks to the captain. Of course, tells the captain he's just an ordinary passenger. shouldn't we be on our way? And of course, Ismay kind of leaves, and the captain puts the Titanic at half speed ahead. Now, I want you to think of this for a second. If you have an accident with a plane, a car, a train, a ship, you don't drive it again until you check everything. And so what has happened here? The captain puts the ship at half speed ahead. Now, after the accident, engineers are going around trying to fix things. They're putting on pumps to get rid of the water that is coming in. And there's a series of small holes here, there, and everywhere. And the pumps are handling things okay. There's a lot of water coming in. But once the captain puts the ship at half speed ahead, the volume of water increases exponentially. And before long, thousands of tons of water are pouring into the Titanic and overwhelming the pumps. Now, eventually they'll stop it again, but the damage is done. You know, it's an interesting thing. We have people that come and explain this. Do you ever notice in all of the Titanic movies, do you notice in all the Titanic programs, they never mention this stuff? Never. But you find out that Hitchens, who was in the bridge, he was on duty right at the wheel. He told lots of things that were going on, and others. Now, the interesting thing as well is Lawrence Beasley comes to our aid. Now, he noticed, he was lying in bed, and he said everything was jiggling with the motors running. And he said suddenly everything stopped jiggling. And of course, he knew something was wrong. And of course, he went out to check and see if he could find information. And then went back to his room. And then he felt the jiggling start again. And he said he went out into the hallway and met two nervous ladies, and he brought them over to a tub so they could touch the tub and feel the vibration of the motors. This is a very important thing, because by these actions, by forcing so much water into the ship, the captain was defeating the entire purpose of the pumps and the watertight compartments. Granted, the Titanic was going to sink. But the Titanic sank faster than it should because of the actions of the captain. Now, the engineers down below, of whom none were saved, they kept the electricity on, they kept the pumps running, and they made a ship in which Thomas Andrews said, after surveying the damage while being driven through the water, that the ship had an hour to live, maybe a little bit more than that. And the ship would actually last about 2 hours and 40 minutes, completely. Now, go through your books on the Titanic and see where they mention this. No. But for about 10 minutes, thereabouts, maybe a few minutes less, the Titanic was driven at half speed after the accident, forcing and filling the hold watertight compartments with tremendous amounts of water and guaranteeing an early demise to the ship. Had it not happened that way, and they had not driven the ship at all, the pumps could have held things back a ways, and maybe the ship would have lasted another hour or 2 or 3 hours longer. We don't know. But this is an important thing to know and remember. And it's a pity that such a thing happened. Thank you.